I am a proponent of white magic. I believe in the arcane power to mend wounds, purify blood, heal the sick and injured, and call upon divine hailstorms to brutally defeat my enemies. Wait, what? This game is not Skyrim, and yet playing it again for the first time since 1999, it sure has a lot of similarities. I'm inclined to believe that some of the inspiration for Skyrim was drawn from this ancient DOS game, Excelsior Phase 1, Lysandia. The sad thing though is that not only were there no correct guesses this week, but no one even attempted to guess what today's game would be. I mean, seriously, this is a great RPG. Not perfect, but very fun because it has a lot to do, a lot of different equipment, numerous dungeons and cities and villages and spells and monsters, and a massive story on top of all that. The only drawback is that sometimes it does feel a bit too easy, and it's not completely self-contained, as you need the manual on hand specifically when dealing with buying spells, in order to, know what spells you're actually buying. Anyways, let's get those game stats out of the way. Excelsior Phase 1 was created and released by 11th Dimension Entertainment near the end of 1993 and is a one-player role-playing game. It runs in 80 by 25 16-color text mode with a heavily modified character set, and supports both digitized PC speaker and Sound Blaster sound effects. Though curiously, despite the PC speaker sound being digitized, some of the sound effects that play back with the Sound Blaster support don't play back over the PC speaker, which is just odd, but whatever. As for its current release date, it's still shareware and still very much available. If you go to www.excelsior-rpg.com, you can download the Windows version for free, as well as the sequel, Excelsior Phase 2 Erondor. The unregistered version has always been the full game, just with nag messages that get more prominent the further you progress in the story. Registration for either game costs $15, or you can register both at the same time for $25. I never really could get into the sequel, but it's definitely a more complex game than the first one. The authors have also permitted me to mention that they'll still provide registration codes for the DOS versions instead. And I say versions because there's also a 2.0 version for DOS with a smaller, easier to read font and animated sprites. But I grew up with version 1.0 and I kinda don't like the animated sprites, so that's why we're looking at the older one. Since this is an RPG, you can bet that the story is extremely detailed, albeit it has a somewhat unusual start to it. You play the role of a Fixer, an interdimensional entity working for the Great Council of World Watchers, tasked to solve any problems that occur within all the planes of existence that are caused by deviations in the cosmic fabric of the multiverse. In plain English, if something strange happens on some planet somewhere, you go there, take the appearance of the locals, and fix the problem. Well, apparently something strange is going on with the planet Lysandia, found on Plane 52, Universe 13, Subclass A, coordinates 154.21 by 546.4 by 1321.43 by 72.2. Within common hyperspace, of course. Seriously, could they have made the coordinates any more complicated? Anyways, a strange, evil presence has been creeping into the world from its oceans, and the people themselves have been losing the will to progress and advance themselves. Your task is to take the form of the commoners and attempt to rid the planet of this evil presence. Now, before you begin, your first task is to create your avatar. This is done in a step-by-step process, starting with your name, then proceeding with your race, gender, primary attributes, secondary attributes, class, skills, and alignment. Now, doing all this is important because, just like in Skyrim, you don't directly control a party, just yourself. So, let's go over these starting stats. Your race doesn't really have a huge effect in the game, but each race has different starting attributes, some of which aren't completely balanced with each other. Since you're going to be maxing out your primary attributes in the long run, it's best to pick a race that has secondary attribute bonuses, since your secondary attributes do not change over the course of the game. If you want really high luck, you should play as an elf or an imp. If you want really high charm, you should play as a halfling or glin. If you want things to be a little more challenging, play as a troll. They have the worst starting stats. Mind you, they get many more hit points than the other races, but then so do the giants and half-orcs, and their starting stats aren't nearly as bad. Granted, despite maxing out the primary attributes in the long run, you still need to be selective of those attributes because they determine which of the 13 different classes you can play as. And your class selection is probably the most important one you're going to make. For instance, if you don't have a lot of strength, then you can't play as a warrior. If you don't have a lot of intelligence, you can't play as a mage. No matter what stats you pick, you can always play as a militiaman or a scholar, but there's nothing special about these classes. My recommendations are warrior, archer, mage, or paladin. Warriors are easy to make, just pump your strength up to 30. For an archer, you need at least 25 strength and dexterity. For a mage, you simply need at least 30 intelligence. For a paladin, you need at least 30 strength, 25 intelligence, and 8 piety. Warriors have the best infighting and can equip just about anything. Archers are the only class that can equip the best bow in the game. Mages and clerics are virtually identical and each have access to the powerful magic wand weapons and get more spell points than all the other classes. But clerics require 9 piety to make, so mages are generally better. And if you want to combine powerful melee attacks with good magic abilities, the paladin's the way to go. None of the other classes really have anything special about them, short of what skills you're going to start with. But since you can pick 2 additional starting skills and will acquire all of them in the long run, there's really no point to worrying about it. Now, 3 of the skills you can acquire, specifically music, dark eyes, and lockpicking, they're kind of tricky to get. Music basically requires a lot of traveling. Lockpicking is the most expensive skill to get, and dark eyes isn't hard to get, but it's not cheap and you get diseased in the process. The rest really aren't that difficult to acquire. In fact, you can get the fencing skill right from Castle Excelsior at the start of the game, so choosing to start with the fencing skill is kind of pointless. I highly recommend starting with the bandage skill though, since it allows your health to regenerate on its own and rather quickly too. The last thing you need to select for your character is alignment. And this is actually strictly used for magic casting. Every spell in the game has a particular alignment, and the further your own alignment is from that of the spell you want to cast, the more magic points it takes to cast that spell. Thus, if you want to use a lot of white magic, you want your alignment on the side of good, and if you want to use a lot of black magic, you want your alignment on the side of evil. Also, whenever you cast a spell that doesn't precisely match your alignment, there's a chance that your alignment will shift towards what the spell wants, which in turn makes it easier to cast that spell. So, why did I just dedicate several minutes of this review to character creation? Well, because that's actually the most complicated part of the game. The rest is extremely straightforward. As you've seen so far, you play the game from an overhead perspective, and those of you who've played Ultima will immediately see the resemblance. You can move in 8 directions and have a variety of controls for doing things such as attacking, equipping items, and inspecting things for secrets, among other things. If you ever need a list of the controls, just press the H key, but for the most part they're really easy to remember. Once you get started, the first thing you should do is get yourself some equipment. If you started with the fencing skill or are playing as an archer or magic user, then feel free to spend all 100 of your gold pieces. But if you plan to get the fencing skill from the nearby Castle Excelsior, then you need to save 50 gold to pay for the training. If you're playing a white magic user, you'll want to get the Alleviate Pain spell from the magic shop in the nearby town of Oublier, or if you're playing a black magic user, then you'll want the Flame Toss spell instead. From there, the game doesn't really get going until after you've done a lot of exploration and have familiarized yourself with how everything works. The main game screen consists of your main overhead view, a message bar to tell you what's going on, and your status gauges indicating your hit points, magic points, food, gold, readied weapons, and the armor you're wearing. I say weapons plural because many of the melee weapons are one-handed and you can thus equip 2 at a time. Mind you, most shields take up a hand, save for the buckler or handless shield, and of course bows and crossbows take both hands to use. Every town and village has its own eclectic array of shops, though you can pretty much guarantee that someone in town is going to sell food. Your food is consumed over the course of time, and if you run out, your health gets consumed instead. One other thing you can be sure of too is that every town will have a regiment of guards roaming the streets, and if you decide to attack anyone, they're not going to be too pleased about it. Talking to people is kind of important because many of the things you can do in this game require you to talk to one person in one town, then another in another town, and sometimes the chain can continue for even more towns. Through your conversations, though, you're going to learn about 3 magical amulets that bestow power upon their bearers. The first thing you should accomplish in this game is finding these amulets, though I'll give you some hints. You need a shovel to get the red amulet, and we'll find it under a gravestone. The green amulet is hidden in the same spot as the magic lantern on the second floor of the Forgotten Pits, and the blue amulet requires you to obtain an axe from a woodcutter who lives in a forest. Then you have to cut it into a special tree that can be found in some nearby mountains north of the forest. The reason these amulets are important is because as you gain experience levels, you can place your hands upon special magical orbs found in each of the castles, and if you have the matching amulet, you'll boost one of your primary attributes in the process. The red orb provides strength and hit points, the green orb provides dexterity, and the blue orb provides intelligence and magic points. To gain an experience level, you have to go back to Castle Excelsior and speak with the guild masters in the bottom left corner. With each level up, you'll gain more hit points and magic points, and the random enemies will get more dangerous. One thing I should point out is that it's really easy to screw up the progression of events in this game, so I highly recommend not picking up or using any strange items you come across or going into any dungeons or keeps until you're actually told by someone to do so. The exception being the Forgotten Pits, since you need to get the green amulet and the magic lantern from there. Once you've gotten the blue amulet and returned the borrowed axe to the woodcutter, you will get your first real story element to this game and will finally be able to delve into the storyline. Before that point though, you'll probably want to get yourself as well equipped as possible. Firstly, you want a horse. You can acquire a horse from several places in this game, and once you have one, you'll be able to move twice as fast as everything else, giving you a distinct advantage both in combat and evasion. The only catch with horses is that you can't ride them into a dungeon, you can't board a sailing ship with them, nor can you cast the airwalk spell while riding on one, meaning you can't cross water. Thankfully, you're completely immune to the poisonous marshes while on horseback. Once you have the seamanship skill, you can focus on acquiring a sailing vessel, complete with a catapult for attacking enemies at range. But this can be an incredibly expensive prospect, so you may want to take advantage of the banks. The Lysandian banks can be found in a few towns in all 3 castles and allow you to deposit money, withdraw money, and take out loans of 700 gold that need to be repaid with 840 gold before they're due. There are a few bugs with the banking system though, at least in version 1.0. Notably, the game doesn't actually tell you how long you have left on your loans, just that they're due in quote-unquote 10 days, which is meaningless considering the game doesn't track time in that way. And also, a glitch can occur where the interest you earn on your deposited money will far exceed the normal 5% it's supposed to be, allowing you to amass a ton of gold much faster than you'd normally be capable of. Though speaking of amassing tons of gold, your character's charm attribute determines how much you can buy and sell things for. With a default charm of 5, prices are normal and you sell things for half of that. With a charm of 8, buying and selling prices are almost identical, and with a charm of 9 or higher, you can actually sell things for more than it costs to buy them, allowing you the potential for infinite gold. Obviously this is an oversight, but if you really want to cheat, then well, there you go. You can even go one step further and drink a grey potion to temporarily boost your charm even higher. Another thing that can be expensive too is acquiring magic spells. While the most powerful spells in the game are found in the dungeons and keeps, you're going to be buying the rest of them. Every spell has a 2-letter designation, so casting the spell is incredibly easy. Just press C to cast, type in the 2 letters, and there you go. Though some spells also need to be aimed. In order to know what every spell does, let alone their names without buying them, you'll want to have the manual handy. The contents of the manual can be found in a text file, or if you register the game nowadays, you also get a PDF version of the original printed manual. In any case, there's quite a number of spells, though most of the useful ones are either grey or white magic. Many of the black magic spells simply cause damage, so once you have the better ones, there's no reason to use the others. I tend to go the white magic route because of all the healing spells you can cast, and because it's relatively easy to get the Divine Hailstorm spell, which is the best white magic spell for damaging all enemies on the screen. Other crucial spells to pick up include Purify Blood, which cures any diseases if you catch one, Zaga's Banquet, which provides an emergency source of food, Airwalk, which lets you walk over poisonous marshes and water without ill effects, Omni Heal, which is the most powerful healing spell, Magic Burglar, which in a pinch lets you get through a locked door if you can't lockpick it, and Hasty Exit, which, as you might imagine, immediately gets you out of a dungeon or keep if you end up in a nasty situation or just don't feel like backtracking your way out. It's just too bad you can't make your own spells. As you progress through the storyline, there are quite a number of puzzles you're going to run into, many of which take the form of word and number riddles. While it is very possible to solve these without external help, there is a special hint book you'll get when you register the game, now distributed as a PDF, that basically gives you a complete walkthrough including the answers to these riddles. So if you get stuck, you can always resort to that. But yeah, I don't really want to delve into the story since there's a lot to it. So instead, I'm just going to end things with a few tips that I've picked up from all the hours that I've spent playing this game. Firstly, start with the bandage skill. I cannot stress this enough because without regenerating health, you're going to be spending a ton of money on visits to the inns and healers. Well, unless you take the archery route, since you're rarely going to get struck by anything this way until you start fighting mages and dragons, or unless you take the white magic route, because then you can just cast healing spells. Secondly, if you're playing a character that's primarily relying on melee attacks, it's best to stick with the swords rather than any of the other weapons. And this is because of the fencing skill, which makes swords much easier to hit with and more powerful in general. Plus, virtually every sword in the game can be wielded with one hand, including the most powerful ones such as the speed blades, which you can buy from a town that's far to the south-southeast of Castle Excelsior. This means you can arm two at once and do incredible amounts of damage to your enemies, or even focus on two enemies at a time. Thirdly, if you go the magic route, I highly recommend playing as a major cleric so that you can arm the magic, fire, and thunder wands. Dual wielding two thunder wands will not only make you almost as powerful as a fully equipped warrior, but the wands give you limitless, ranged attacks, something even an archer can only dream about. Fourthly, keep a healthy stock of keys for lockpicking. At the start of the game, they may seem a bit expensive, but you really don't want to run out of these things. Fifthly, unlike in a dungeon crawl where you have to search repeatedly, in this game when you inspect something for secrets, if there is a secret there, you will find out about it on the first try, so there's no need to inspect something multiple times. Lastly, and my biggest tip for survival is to take advantage of your surroundings and the enemy AI to prevent yourself from having to fight two or more enemies at a time. The enemies in this game sometimes get stuck on the wrong side of a solid object, plus they will never walk around something if they would otherwise have a direct line of movement towards you in one of the four cardinal directions. Now, keeping these things in mind, if you do have multiple enemies ganging up on you, or you're just low on health, you can usually run away towards something solid, then diagonally move past that solid object to at least create a gap between you and the enemy at worst, or completely evade the enemy at best. Unfortunately, this doesn't quite work with enemies that can shoot, like the archers and mages, but thankfully these enemies sometimes fail to move towards you because of their checking to see if they can hit you or not. So yeah, that should get you started on your quest to Excelsior Phase 1. This is a very fun game, with an incredibly high nostalgia factor, and as we saw, no less than 9 similarities to the more recently released Skyrim. It does have some minor bugs, and it is very possible to put the game into an unwinnable state, but then since the game isn't really that long and can be beaten in about 4 or 5 hours once you know exactly what you're doing, and because you can roleplay this thing in so many different ways, there's a surprising amount of replay value. In fact, to get the full experience, you have to beat the game at least 3 times. Once as a warrior, once as an archer, and once as a magic user, and then beyond that, there's lots of ways you can stunt your ultimate capacities to increase the difficulty, such as by playing as a scholar, assassin, or bard, since those 3 classes cannot equip any of the most powerful weapons in the game. Heck, you may want to do that anyways in case you find the game too easy, since, as I said at the start, as far as RPGs go, this is probably the easiest one I've ever played. Not that that's a bad thing, but if you're looking for a really challenging RPG, this isn't it. Now, even though most people are going to be playing the Windows version nowadays, if you do have either of the DOS versions, then all you have to do to get them running in DOSBox is set cycles to max, unless you also want the Sound Blaster support enabled. Being a fan of dungeon crawls, I really don't like having the sound effects on in this game because they slow everything down considerably. But if you do want the Sound Blaster support enabled, there's a few things you need to do. Firstly, you need to obtain a copy of the CT Voice driver file. This was distributed with all of the early Sound Blaster cards, and it's really easy to find downloads of this file online. And no, it does not matter which version of the file you get. Once you have this file, put it in the same folder as Excelsior. Now secondly, for some mysterious reason, the game only supports sound playback on port 220, IRQ5, DMA1. If any of these values are different, the Sound Blaster support will not work. Lastly, since DOSBox's Gravis ultrasound support defaults to IRQ5 as well, you'll want to turn Gust support off to avoid any potential conflicts. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week's a filler, and I'm thinking about taking a practical look at the various gamepads and joysticks that I have. But if you guys have any other ideas, make sure to send them to adg@pixelships.com, and stay tuned as our trek through DOS gaming continues.
Ow! Ow!